declare this a quorum. So, welcome everybody. I'm Carol Runyon. I organized this with a guest from the Writing Center, Becca Wright. I know most of you in the room, but since I don't know everybody, maybe, and you may not know each other, maybe we could do a quick introduction of who's here and what program you're in, and do you want them to say anything about sort of what they're working on?
Sure. One thing that I would like for you to add is if there's anything that you're looking to get out of this workshop, or anything that you're looking like specifically to improve when it comes to scientific writing, because I'm going to make us a little list and try to work that in.
Right. So, Ellen, yes.
My name's Emily. I'm a first-year DRPH student in Community and Behavioral Health. I'm working on, what we talk about
Sure.
the paper? Oh, so
Sure.
I'm working on a paper on child labor. So that's what I'll be focusing on. And for scientific writing, I think I'd really like to work on learning how to be concise, but making sure that you still get the relevant information in there. So decreasing rambling and kind of running on, but making sure that you still have all the necessary information.
Good.
Danielle, soon to be a graduate.
Yeah, I'm Danielle. I'm a third-year PhD student of epidemiology. I'm defending in like 2 weeks. So, yeah, for writing, I think for me, I just like submitted a response to reviewers for a paper that I got feedback on. So, like drafting that and how to like not sound mean, even though you want to.
Even though they were stupid.
Yeah.
That's a good one. You just want to flip them all off when you get the feedback.
My name is Patrick Gray. I'm a second-year PhD student in that department. I'm working on type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
And I think in terms of what I want to get out of this seminar, I think being more concise definitely. And then also, I'm also interested in kind of scientific writing, grammar and scientific writing, just kind of like common pitfalls and how to avoid that. It's an easy way for people to kind of look down on your work.
Sure. That's most of what we're going to do today.
Okay.
Actually,
great.
were you at the last one?
I was.
I thought I recognized you. Okay.
Allison?
Alice Lazelle, I'm a first-year DRPH epi student. We're working on the paper for Carol's class right now, and at work we're doing a lot of grant writing right now. I think the thing I want to learn the most about is writing more in an active voice than a passive voice.
Yep.
I struggle with that. Yeah.
We're going to spend a lot of time on that.
I'm Tarek Walker. I'm a fellow in the pulmonary medicine division, so I'm an MD. And I'm doing sort of my career development path a little backwards. So I'm learning research principles now rather than like in my formal clinical training pathway. So I'm kind of like what you might call a research fellow in a way. Like I guess I've only written a couple of papers in my lifetime, and my mentors suggest that if I want to stay in academia that I publish. So
It kind of works that way.
right. So I guess what I'd like to learn is how you know, like I guess I have like maybe 3 or 4 things. So how you know when you're ready to write, when you're done gathering,
Yeah.
and you're ready to analyze it and summarize it and disseminate it. I think one of my gaps too is kind of filling in space in a manuscript. So I bet like probably everyone in this room who's done some research could probably summarize their research work in 1 page, but how to kind of make it meaty is kind of one of my challenges. And I think someone alluded to this too, like just how to write without rambling, kind of like I'm doing now. So that's kind of my and then also kind of how to determine when where to submit your scientific writing. So how to know this is earth-shattering, it needs to be submitted to the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, versus, well, this is really just the first stage of more work, a lot of work that really needs to be done, and therefore needs to go into a much smaller type of journal. So those are kind of steps I could use some help with.
Great.
Hi, my name is Anne Levon. I'm a first year DRPH Environmental Occupational Health student, and right now I'm working on a paper for chronic kidney disease of non-traditional causes. And I think everyone's kind of hit on what I would like. Whereas it was a good one, I didn't think about that, but I know that's something I'm going to run into. And just know how to be coherent.
Okay.
My name is Kelsey Ford. I'm a first year DRPH student in community behavioral health. I work on a lot of different projects in the digital health, mobile health technology space. And I would love to get some advice or some guidance around working with teams and having like a cohesive tone through papers. And a lot of my work, it's very interdisciplinary, and we have different voices working on proposals or manuscripts, and it can be a little puzzle piece-like. So I'd like some guidance around that.
That was a very diplomatic way of describing.
You know what I do? Yeah, I'm trying to have tact there. Yeah.
I'm Brian Ford. I'm a MPH student in the EOH concentration. And I feel like I'm writing a paper now about interactive resources, so it's a little bit different than standard research writing, I think. So I think I'm going to learn a ton since I'm brand new at this, and just want to echo a few things that people have said, grammar and sentence structure that are common. Where to even start looking at what journals to submit, not necessarily choosing the journal, but how to find a list of common journals for different topics. Yeah, I think that's sums it up.
Okay.
Alright, I'm Elise Grover. I'm a first year DRPH student in the Environmental and Occupational Health department, and I'm here for a paper on female genital mutilation in immigrants living in the U.S. But I guess in general, with scientific writing, I'm wondering, I guess if, like, where creativity comes in.
Sure.
Or if I should just be sticking to a formula.
Sure. It doesn't come in. But your voice comes in. Your voice comes in.
That's a good question.
And I'm Carol.
Good one. Yeah, good.
I'm Carol Runyon. I'm a professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Community Behavioral Health. And I think I'm about 39th year student of everything. And I've done a lot of writing, and I'm pleased to get you all here, and I'll help out as best I can.
Okay. Yeah, I'll defer to Carol a lot. So the great thing about just having a few of us here is that we can do this seminar style, so we don't have to do it all like me talking to you. So I very much encourage you at any point, if you have a question or if what I'm saying doesn't make sense or you want to challenge me or you want to ask a faculty member a question, let's do it. Let's take advantage of that time. Carol organized a graduate writing course back in February, wasn't it? It was like a long time ago.
Yeah.
Time flies. And at that one, if for those of you who were here at that one, we talked about kind of bigger parts of writing. We talked about things like thesis statements, paragraph organization, overall organization of sections. We looked at like big building blocks of papers. Today, when we go into scientific writing, we're going to go into like the nuts and bolts. We're going to go really into it. So for those of you who are saying like, how do I make this concise? What about active and passive? What about sentence structure? What about my tone? That's where we're going to live today. It's not so much in the big picture stuff, but in the teeny tiny stuff. And it's not like the most exciting presentation ever. I'm going to try to make it exciting and interesting, but these are really important principles and strategies that you can apply like no matter what to scientific writing, which was our goal for this workshop. So I'm Becca. I work for the Writing Center. Just a quick plug for us. For those of you who don't know us, I passed out our brochures. The thing that I would just like for you to remember is that we're a free service for you and that we help you with any kind of writing that you're doing. Obviously, that means for your classes. Obviously, it means if you're submitting things for publication or if you're working on like grant proposals. But this also means that we'll help you, for those of you who are so close to being done, we help you with like resumes and CVs and personal statements and cover letters and all of those types of things too, so it doesn't just have to be class related. How you make an appointment with us is you just go to our website that's down here. It'll take you just a minute to sign in. My quick little blurb about that is whatever email address you use when you sign in, remember what that is because it doesn't have to be your school one, it can be Gmail or whatever. So if you are registering with us so that you can make appointments, remember what your email address is and remember what your password is. Then you can get in and make an appointment, and we have a gazillion locations, but the ones that I think that would be most convenient for you guys are here. We're in the Health Sciences Library. We're on the first floor. So if you're looking at our locations in the drop-down menu, look for HSL. You would think it would be AMC. That would just make too much sense. But it's HSL for Health Sciences Library. Another platform that would be good for you guys would be the Graduate Dropbox, which means that you don't have to show up anywhere in person. What you can do is you can upload your document. That's the one space that we have in the Writing Center where a consultant takes the most uninterrupted time with your paper. The consultant has 2 straight hours that they spend on it, and then what they do is they upload comments to you. So if we're all crazy busy trying to juggle a lot of things. If you just want to like drop your paper off and then get detailed comments on it, do that. The one caveat to that is it typically is a 4-day turnaround. So if something is due in the next couple of days, that's not really gonna help you out. But if you're planning something in advance and you're just kind of taking it in steps, then do that. Okay, let's get into it. Oh.
Where'd it go?
Guess what? I'm not the presenter. Let's do another user.
Do I need to log you in?
Oh, there I am. Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. So here's what we're going to do today. I tried to divide these up on your agenda into some clear-cut categories, but you'll see that one just kind of leads into the next, We're going to talk generally about communication guidelines in scientific writing. We're going to talk about clear language strategies. We'll take just a quick break if we need one. Then, for those of you, we're going to spend time on concision and revision. And then we're going to go into some tips. The tips are based off of instructor pet peeves that have been made known to us, and then also very common errors that we see in the Writing Center. So it's just kind of a do and don't list as you progress in your writing. And we'll allow time at the end for Q&A, but really let's just ask questions as they come up. Okay. I know that science writing, regardless of your level, like if you've been an active professional for years and years and now you're coming back to writing, or if you're like almost done with your dissertation and you're wondering what writing is in your future, it can be very intimidating because science writing, like business writing, is highly structured, it's highly formulaic. Let's use that to our advantage. Because I think something that people find intimidating about writing is that they don't know where to start, or they don't know what their ideas are, or they don't know how to hook the reader, and they don't know how to make it nuanced and fun. Okay, so science writing is none of those things. So the good thing about science writing is that you think about what you want to say, and then you say it in a really organized way. And a lot of scientific genres have structures in place already. Those are not the things that we're necessarily going to talk about today. Like proposals have structures. Your research papers and manuscripts like MRAD, right? Like those have structures to them. Lab reports, case studies, they all have structures to them. In your handout, I just want to briefly go through what you have to take with you later. You have like principles of scientific writing, which we're going to cover a lot of today. And then you have helpful hints on clarity and concision. So we're going to go over some of these today, but this is a nice little like worksheet to review later. If you keep flipping, we have understanding passive and active voice. We're going to hit on that a lot today, but this is just something that you can take with you and not have to worry about taking so many notes. But when we talk about specific scientific documents, I included 2 handouts on here. One of them is how to write a literature review. The last one is how to write an abstract. Those are 2 of the most common questions that we get in the Writing Center because those are parts of all kinds of different classes and projects and capstones and things like that for you guys. So I did include some specific generic information about certain types of documents. And as we go through the presentation, if you're thinking in your mind, oh, I have this really specific question, let's talk about it, okay? But generally what we're going to focus on today is no matter what you're writing in the science field, what does your writing need to be like? The first thing is, in any good kind of writing, we need to know our audience and we need to play to our audience. For many of us, our audience is our professor. And our professor has given us their requirements, they've given us their expectations, and regardless of how we feel about that, or whether or not we agree, the wise move that a writer makes is to play to the audience. A writer's job is to communicate information, so we want to do that effectively. When we write something, our writing serves as a written product that speaks for us in our absence. So we want our writing to do the work that we are not there physically to do. And also, the reader expectations, the audience expectations are oftentimes in line with what the generic conventions are. So it's important when we know that we're writing a specific kind of document that we know what the sections are supposed to do. Like with MRAD, those, intro, methods and materials, results, discussion, if there's a lit review, if there's an abstract. We need to know not only that those are part of it, but like what those sections actually do, so that we don't repeat ourselves, become redundant, or just miss the mark. Some other reader expectations just that we should keep in mind academically, but also if we're writing for journals, and actually depending on where we submit, this might be different. Right? So some more things that we need to know about our reader and their expectations are what citation style we're supposed to use and then making sure that we're using it correctly. That's a technicality, but it's a really important one. It's kind of like the grammar of your field. You just want to get it right. Largely for you guys, paraphrasing is way more important than direct quotations, and I think that you know that, right? But it's just a good reminder that that's pretty much, and no matter what you write, that's important. Whether or not to include visual components is a consideration as well. I know for you guys in most of your writing, you have to make the decision of, visual graphs and diagrams and charts are super helpful at conveying a myriad of complex information in a way that we can understand very quickly. That's very, very useful. A couple of things we should be aware about with graphs or charts or visuals is that they're not duplicating information that we're writing, that they're just supplementing or enhancing it. We don't want to be writing it and showing it. So if it's important that we write it out, maybe include the visual as an appendix so that the reader can look at it on their own and a visual doesn't disrupt that reading process. However, if this is information that is so much easier to digest and quickly understand, in order to then get to the rest of what you want to say, a visual is a good move. We want to live in the world of active voice. We're going to talk about, we're not going to pick on passive voice entirely. There are places where passive voice is useful, but mainly we want to be very active with our language and very direct with our language. And we want to also just be kind of simplistic. And by that, I don't mean elementary. I just mean that readers need clarity in order to follow you. And sometimes the more advanced we get in our field, the more like big words we think that we need to throw in there, and we really don't. The best writers out there can be easily understood with simple language.
Can I just add?
Of course.
So under the paraphrase thing, I think I've seen students sometimes get confused about paraphrasing and then not citing, or paraphrasing, when to draw that distinction. That might be helpful.
Of course. So we know that when we directly quote, we know that before the period comes the citation. And if we're doing something like APA, it's going to be like that. But the problem with direct quotation is that oftentimes it's unnecessary. At your level, we know that you're doing good research and you don't need those quotations to prove that you're looking up sources. The advantage of paraphrasing is that you never break up your tone. Somebody had said like tone within teams. That's important not only within like teams to have a coherent tone, but within your own paper. You don't always want to be bouncing back and forth between what you're saying and then, oh, this really sophisticated quote, and then back to your language. And then it's disruptive and it makes it look like it's not as coherent as it could be. So oftentimes what we want to do is just put the information, integrate it into our own words. But that's still not our information, right? It's still coming from a source. So oftentimes we see paraphrased information cited in a couple of different ways. If you're citing, or if you're including the paraphrased information as part of your greater thought, then your sentence might look something like this. Here's some paraphrased information. I'm showing that it comes from a source, but then here's my voice, and I'm synthesizing it with my thoughts, right? Another way that we can paraphrase is say that we're integrating information back and forth, but most of it is from a particular source. Then say that we have like a couple of sentences. Then we would put the citation after a couple of sentences to show like this is mainly from this same source. Does that help?
Does that make sense?
So when we're thinking about reader expectations and that there's somebody on the other end of this slide is basically going to guide us the rest of the way through the presentation. So mental energy is required on the part of the reader to digest every part of your discourse. This is what I mean by we're not talking big picture like sections of your paper. We're talking like at the sentence level. Is the reader able to follow you? Because the act of reading requires a reader to do two things simultaneously. It requires them to read and understand the words that are on the page and directly deduce meaning from that. So it's both like a physical act of like we're reading, and it's this automatic like translation and interpretation in our own minds of following the idea. So the more clear the language is, the easier it is for us to stick with you with your idea. So that they're both perceiving the structure of your sentence, but they're grasping the substance of the point that you're making. And so that's why direct language is important. It's also why you always want to lead with your most important information first. This is a problem that we see in scientific writing because at this level you guys are very advanced and you're able to synthesize ideas together and draw connections and relationships. And sometimes in getting to our main point, we're providing like all of this context, and essentially what we're doing is we're working toward the thing that we want the reader to know. We got to reverse that. We have to tell the reader what we want them to know and then support it. So write however you want to write. But when you're revising and you're structuring something to turn it in, topic sentences in every single paragraph are crucial. You lead with the main point always, then support it with evidence and context. Here's an example of prioritizing information within sentences. This scientific writing workshop, which was designed specifically for AMC students who are known to be competitive and detail-oriented, intends to meet their needs and to improve their writing skills and confidence. Too many ideas in the same sentence. They're competing for your attention and it's distracting. And by the time you get to like the 8th clause in there, you've forgotten what the subject of the sentence is. So in order to stress and prioritize the information, one sentence is about the workshop, right? 1 point, I should say. 1 point is about the students. So let's break those up. The science writing workshop is specifically designed for AMC students. Okay, got it. What about the students? AMC students are competitive and detail-oriented, so this workshop intends to meet a variety of their needs. Got it, right? Another thing, so we need to prioritize our information and we need to keep our subjects and our verbs close together. A big thing at our level is a subject and then we modify it and then we qualify the modifier and then we add that one other piece of detail to prove that we like know the connections, and the verb is on like the 5th line of writing. A reader doesn't understand that, okay? So look how far apart in that first sentence the subject and the verb are. So we need to just say, this science writing workshop is blah, 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 blah. The results show. The study indicates. Okay? And we can leave our descriptions for another sentence where we can put the subject and the verb in the description really close together. So somebody help me out. Just pick one or the other of these sentences and somebody just give us a better example.
Maybe for the first one, you could say that the trial concluded that the defendants made full disclosure of all relevant information.
Yep. So one major point that we should be getting here is to make our sentences shorter. This doesn't mean that we make them simplistic. It just means that if they're 3 or 4 lines long, if we're going through and revising our papers and we're not even reading, if we're just looking for periods, and we have like 2 on an entire page, our sentences are too long, right? They have too many ideas in there. And then the other thing that we see quite a lot is if you start throwing pronouns in there, the doctor said that he recommended that she do this particular exercise so that she could learn from the nursing practitioner what she decided. It's like, wait a minute, who's doing what at this point? Okay, that's another common thing that we see too. So breaking up these long sentences and whatever their main ideas are, and then, we can even do the fancy academic thing of the semicolon. And we can have one main idea on this side and then the connected idea on that side, but the reader knows, oh, hang on. Okay, I got a break, and then they're going to tell me something else about it, right? Then we can do the academic-y thing there and separate those out. So sometimes in putting our subject and our verb close together, we have to realize what the verb is, and it shouldn't always be is, right? Things should be doing action, doing specific action. So let's talk a little bit about like locating the verb or the action and articulating it. If there could be the presentation of data that would indicate the representation of the status of the problem was accurate, then a decision could be made. Is there an active agent in the sentence? Is anybody doing anything? Do we know like what could be done? I guess a decision could be made, maybe. The words that are underlined are called nominalizations. That's when we take a verb and we make a noun out of it. Instead of Becca is presenting, a presentation is made by Becca, right? We see lots of nominalizations in there, and sometimes this can't be avoided. We're not going to pick on this all the time, but if this is one of our habits we need to get out of it, and we need to have an active agent and then an active verb that's acting upon something or that's resulting in the direct object. So what are the verbs here? So transcription of the 5S RNA genes in the egg extract is whatever dependent. This is surprising because the concentration of whatever is the same as in the whatever nuclear extract. The other transcription factors and RNA whatever are presumed to be in an excess over available whatever because whatever genes are transcribed in the egg extract. The addition of egg extract to the whatever nuclear extract has two effects on transcription efficiency. None of us are paying attention right now, okay? First, there is the general inhibition of transcription that can be alleviated in part by supplementation with high concentrations of RNA whatever. And second, okay, I don't know what the first part was, but second, egg extract destabilizes transcription complexes formed with the whatever, but not somatic whatever genes. Look at the verbs. It's all like to be verbs and states of being. So here's what they were. Is, are, has been. Those are not active verbs, okay? The fun thing about this is we start to see it more and more, especially like maybe working in groups, because some people have a direct way of writing, and then so this can like really tear the crap out of the cohesiveness of the paper. But just like a takeaway is, I think that all of us are thinking like, how do I write? And the answer is write however you want. Because the act of writing is getting the ideas out of your head onto paper and moving stuff around and correlating ideas and coming up with a cohesive structure. There's nothing wrong with the way that any of us in here write, because there is no one way to write. The key to making things better and better and better is the endless revisions that keep us awake at night and that we never want to do. But that's where these changes are going to be made. So I don't want anybody thinking that like in order to sit down and write a paper, we have to follow all of these rules. That's not it. What we need to do is write it out and then look for these things. And that's as easy as doing a word search for is, are, has been, was, right? And then taking a look at our sentence structure. So a way to start to consider to make the verbs more active would be something like transcription of the 5S RNA genes in the egg extract is dependent, okay? But we could just start with the subject. 5S RNA gene transcription depends upon TF whatever, okay? The addition of egg extract into the whatever nuclear extract has two effects on transcription efficiency. We could say the addition of the egg extract to the whatever results in two effects, right? There's a result. It doesn't just like have, it doesn't own. Are we tracking? Told you this was like the nitty-gritty. But this is where a lot of scientific writing really actually differs from other writing. Business writing is the same way. A lot of times in your careers, the business writing and the scientific writing are going to overlap. The great news about that is they follow the same protocol generally. So most of the things that I'm saying for scientific writing apply to any form of business writing as well. Is that a hint?
So the last example, you're kind of making it more active.
Yeah.
Owning it, but you're not making it more succinct.
No.
So I guess I would struggle in that. Like I can make a sentence into active, but then all my sentences are going to be super long.
Okay.
So what's a good idea to succinctly make it active?
Okay. So we're going to have like 55 slides on concision.
Okay. Yeah.
So right now, here are the couple things that I'm wanting us to take away here, and we're going to get lost in the deets because a lot of these slides are grammatical. But the main takeaways right now are prioritize the most important information at every single level. The first sentence of the paragraph, the first part of the sentence should be the active agent most of the time. And right now, we're just working to make language more active and to make it more accurate than just using to be verbs. We're not trying to make it more concise yet. We're simply trying to make it more clear and show direct action rather than states of being. We'll get to the concision part. Other?
So excited. For the deets.
Yeah, the deep.
Okay, so now we're going to kind of transition into a bunch of active and passive voice. We're going to toggle back and forth between the two. And in talking about one, we're going to focus on that information, but then also highlight the other just in opposition, right? In passive voice, what most of the time we want to avoid, the reason that we want to avoid it is that an action is done upon something. We don't have an active agent doing something. We have an action that results in something being done to something. Now, we'll get to this later, but sometimes passive voice is important because the action is important. It's more important than the subject. But most of the time, the active agent is more important. So what passive voice is typically constituted by is a to be verb with the past participle and by. The food is delivered by the waiter. The temper tantrum was thrown by my daughter. The presentation is given by Becca. The presentation was scheduled by Carol. Okay, the presentation is the focus there, not Carol scheduled the observation. Then she would be the focus. So something was done, and in passive voice, what we're concerned with is the something that was done, not by whom. And that's why the something that was done comes first. Mistakes were made, right? Anytime we listen to politicians, they basically only communicate through passive voice. It's the most diplomatic. Nobody ever gets blamed. You can't really follow what they're saying because we don't know where the verbs are. That's a thing. Mistakes were made. The toy was found beneath the couch. Active voice follows the typical sentence structure that we're used to in English, which is subject, verb, object. The subject is the thing that does the action. The verb is the action. The direct object is what is acted upon. The boy threw the ball. Becca eats Chipotle every day. Okay? That's what we're used to. So the waiter filled the glass. My daughter threw a temper tantrum. The agency is super clear. We made mistakes. Our leaders made mistakes. Dad found the toy under the couch. This takes very little explanation. It's a very basic grammar concept, but for those of us who are struggling with passive voice and active voice, one of the things that we can start to do, again in revision, not in writing, but when we're revising, what we need to focus on is what is the main subject of the sentence. Is the subject the action? Studies were conducted. Or is the subject the actor? Our team conducted the studies, right? What do we want to start with?
I've had some co-authors who have had me get rid of any time where I say we found or our study found, and they don't like it, and that's my trying to use active voice. But then when I change the sentence, it turns into passive voice.
Are they doing that because to remove the first person, the we, the I?
Yeah.
That's another, I like Carol's input on this because I see both. Even in journals, we see the use of we. We see the use of this project. And then sometimes we see more academic distance.
Yeah, and it used to be, when I was a graduate student, we learned to write in passive voice. That's how journals were written. And then it all switched about, 15 years ago or so. So some people are in the habit of writing that way because they learned it that way. It's been a struggle for me to switch over. It didn't feel natural. And it may be that there's some disciplines, I don't know, some of you are from different disciplines, where there may still be more preponderance of writing that way. But most journals that I submit to want active voice.
And you said the team found, like a third person, not first.
Yeah, or results indicated, right? So I'm trying to think of like the other phrases where like the aim of the study is to, right? So then you can actually take the participants out of it, but you can take the possessiveness out of it. It was the team's aim. So you can just take the team out of it and say the aim of the project is to demonstrate da 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 da. So that's one way to do it, is what is the noun, the project's goal, what we wanted to demonstrate was, and you can take the we out of it and say the goal of the research was to investigate da da da. That's another way to do it. And that's another way to do it directly and not, or actively and not passively.
And concisely.
Yes, very concisely. Subject verb, right? Of course it's an is verb, the goal is, but still, whatever. Okay, the problem with passive voice, the reason we all pick on it is because what passive voice is not, is it is not direct and it is not concise, and it's often not clear. So that's the problem with it. If I say the boy threw the ball, there's pretty much no confusion about that. If I say the ball was thrown by the boy, it might take us a second to get to arrive at that same meaning, which means it's a little less clear. Passive voice, though, and my boss had me put 55 asterisks on here, because passive voice is strategic, and it can be useful, and it can be standard practice, depending on what your field is and depending on what the document is. So what I do want you to take away is widely everybody wants active voice. That doesn't mean that you will never use passive voice. Okay, you sometimes will. So Allison, you're not thinking of just alleviating all passive voice ever. You're thinking about, let me examine my writing to make sure that it's mostly active. Here are the cases in which passive voice is more helpful. It's more helpful if the agent isn't that important. And oftentimes when we get into the details of medicine or the details of our field, it's not. As the agent is not as important as the results are. So sometimes this really is the case, that the agent is less obvious or completely unknown or just not as relevant as the result. So some examples are, the definitive guide to peat moss was published in 1937. So we're talking about the guide, not the publishing company. My little brother was born 2 years later. We're not worried about my mom went into labor and then had my brother, right? It is rumored that my little brother eats peat moss. I have the overturned plant example because a really good friend of mine has a 2-year-old son, and she's a real plant person. She has the shirt that says plant lady and all this stuff, and she's very proud in their apartment she has this fiddle leaf plant or something that's 10 feet tall, but it's super skinny and it's in a little pot. And she, of course, goes into the kitchen for 2 seconds, you know what's coming, and then she comes out and the plant is overturned on the floor and all the dirt is out. And her son goes, uh-oh, the plant was knocked over. So total passive voice, because he's trying to take himself as the agent out. He's not saying Mom, I knocked over the plant. He's evading it, right? So that's a funny way to think about passive voice is uh-oh, the experiment, or no, uh-oh, the results were not what was expected from the experiment, right? Mistakes were made. Oh, well. But I thought that was funny. Passive voice can help sentence cohesion. So when we talk about, hey, we want to keep our subjects and verbs close together. Hey, we want to prioritize information. We don't want to have 57 ideas in the same sentence. Got it. But sometimes we do have interrelations and correlations and relationships within a sentence, and those things need to be cohesive, and those things are often best illustrated through passive voice. Passive voice allows us to connect ideas through a process that's called known new, which we'll get to later in the presentation. But that's to say that active voice creates active sentences that are mostly clear and concise and direct and accurate. Passive voice can help demonstrate relationships better. So conservative parents are upset about Jefferson High's new optimal pants Friday policy. Optional, I mean. The policy was unanimously voted on and passed by the student body. So that's saying parents are upset. However, there's this relationship between the issue and the students who voted for the issue. It's establishing like a relationship there. I just returned from visiting your mom. She is haunted by ghosts, after all, and I'm a serious paranormal investigator. There's a connection between me meeting with your mom there, okay? And then when we switch into active voice, the sentence becomes much more clear. For the present, analyses, data on children and adolescents, was used. Data was used. The plant was turned over. But active is, for the present analyses, we used data in children and adolescents. Or, to your point about taking the we out, the present analyses used data. The project studied this. The aim focused on, and we just take the team out of it.
Yeah, I think both the first and the second. I mean, I've seen both.
I mean, we see these all the time.
Yeah. So I think the sometimes you see criticisms with the last one actually, because it's you're kind of waiting to know how it really tell you how the data was used or how analysis was done. So,
and that would be an example of something that's active and not clear. This was actually hard for me when Carolyn and I corresponded about like what to focus on in this presentation. In reviewing the slides, sometimes I was like, what exactly is wrong with, like, what am I going to tell them is wrong with the information? And it's not so much that something is wrong. It's the contrast between the two. And the fact that, generally speaking, we don't want everything that we say to be passive. Because that really is confusing after a while. But it's not that any of these are grammatically incorrect. It's not that any of these are glaring mistakes. It's just illustrating what the difference really is between the two.
But the first sentence, it should be data were.
Data were, I know. Sorry. Oh my goodness.
That was for Patrick. Before he said something.
And you guys can call me out on it. I'm not a scientist, people. Passive. Additionally, renal outcomes may not be improved by early surgical intervention. So we're focusing on renal outcomes and what happens to them. The second one, we're focusing on surgical intervention. So additionally, early surgical intervention may not improve renal outcomes. So that is just, neither one is right or wrong, but it should be a conscious decision of how we're placing it. The other thing that's interesting too is sometimes, and I'm not talking about at Anschutz, but sometimes in other places, other campuses that I work with students, they'll come in and they'll say, my teacher commented on my passive voice, and it's not passive. Is, can be, we don't want to use is all the time, but it's not necessarily passive. This presentation is from 4:15 to 6:15. So that's interesting too. So we're trying to define like exactly what passive and active are.
Well, and also distinguishing from past tense.
Yeah, past tense too. Past tense is when something happened in the past. The other thing that's interesting, we see this too with past tense, is we need to be careful in our research, toggling between past and present. So I'm telling you stuff that you already know, but things that happened in the past are past tense. The Titanic sunk, right? Darwin presented the theory of evolution in whatever. That happened, and it's over. However, a lot of Darwin's theories or Freud's theories still remain presently accepted and true. So that's when we start to toggle back and forth between something that happened and is over, but something that remains considerable or active in our own time, and that's in the present tense. That's why a lot of times when we write about things, in The Tempest, Shakespeare writes, da-da-da-da-da. Well, Shakespeare's dead, but the tempest is here right in front of me. And Shakespeare is doing this thing in this reading of it. Does that help with past tense too? Like, we all get past tense, but some ideas remain in the present.
Yeah, I think for me where I get mixed up with that is when I like write my proposal, everything's like, we will do this.
Yes.
And then I bring everything over to like, now I want to publish it. And I did it. So then I have to change all my tense to the past. And so I like get caught up in that because I don't check it until someone's like, oh wait, you did that. You need to change it to past
Yep.
tense.
And sometimes maybe you just get somebody else to look over it.
Yeah.
Because I know what it's like. I think we all know what it's like to spend so much time on a document that after a while you don't see it anymore. Despite your best efforts, despite what you want to do, despite your attention level, your brain is so used to it, your brain created it, it just tunes out. And one of the best things you can do is just have somebody else just check for verb tense. It's a good idea.
A question about that too. When you're writing proposals, it is very talking about what you will do in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way around that, or do you say we will collect? You know, like how do you write a proposal without having that extra piece next to your verb?
I think that that's an honest way of writing a proposal. I think that's a generic convention of what a proposal is.
Okay.
It's this thing that will be done in the future.
I think I just get like PTSD from like feedback, like don't say is, forget this,
Sure.
you know. So then I'm like, oh, how should I write this? But okay.
I mean, that's my, Carol, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it is proposing what you're planning to do. And so, now there may be pieces in proposals where you're talking about what you have done leading up to your proposal, and then that shouldn't be in future tense. But what you're planning to do, what you're asking for money to do, it better be future tense, or else they'll say, well, why are you doing this if you've already done stuff? Right.
Another example of business writing and scientific writing kind of coinciding is also something like a statement of intent or a cover letter. Those are two things that combine past, present, and future in the same rhetorical document. I want presently this job at this place. I am excited to apply presently for this job. I'm very qualified in that I have done these things that are over. And then in the end, what I'm telling you is I will make an excellent addition to your team, right? So we do this. We project into the future in some documents. Okay, a few other, and these are few, but a few other examples where passive voice is okay is when you're talking about the methodology. So when we're talking about materials and methods and we're talking about strategies, sometimes it's okay to do that in passive voice because the action is in fact more important than who did it. What is done counts more than who does it. I already said, like establishing relationships and correlations. When the relationship is more important than who established it or whether or not it's widely accepted, when it's the relationship we're focusing on. And we're going to talk about what's called known new. We're going to get, if you can even believe it, we're going to get deeper into sentence structure. When sentence cohesion and when sentence cohesion is important and when you're using one sentence and then building to the next and building to the next, that cohesion can be gained through passive voice. Here are examples of methodology. Skewed variables were log transformed. Waist circumference was measured with. Formal data sharing agreements were established. 74.9% of children were categorized as normal weight. So it's the method by which we gained the information that's important. Here are some examples of more like cohesion in relationships.
Sorry, I just had a question about that last slide. So, like the first one, you could say we log transform skewed variables.
You could.
So, I don't know what my question is.
I mean, I had the same thought. I would have written every one of those in active voice. And so it's interesting that.
Trying to think like particularly in lit reviews. When lit reviews are done thematically by different methodology, but even still then you could say like Smith et al. Logged whatever via, I don't know.
I think you're just trying to, like what you said at the beginning, focus on what was important at the very beginning of the sentence, which is skewing the variables.
Right.
Waist circumference.
Right.
So putting that in front.
Right. I mean, sometimes you want to focus on the action and not who's doing it. Allison is going to poke holes into everything. But the fact of the matter is, if you're focusing on active voice, you could totally do that. Right? Like the study logged the results, da-da-da. Right? Okay, correlations and relationships. Time spent sedentary was moderately inversely correlated with time spent in da-da-da. Total physical activity was significantly and inversely associated with blah, blah, blah. Whatever this formula is, was considered statistically significant, da-da-da. Pregnancy has been found to increase risk for. We see a lot of this last one. Now, you could turn that active by saying, like, pregnancy increases the risk of da-da-da. But not always. I mean, you could make the choice. Patrick's making a face. Is that
No, I agree. Because that, if you say pregnancy increases the risk, that establishes it as a true fact.
That's right.
This maintains
That's right.
the uncertainty, which is fundamental to science. Right?
That's right.
So I don't know, I'm just laughing because that's how I write.
Well, and that's true too, because if we talk about we want our writing to be clear, ultimately our writing represents us and our knowledge, and we want that to be communicated as accurately as we possibly can, then we have to pay attention to sentence structure. Because if we say pregnancy has been found to, that implies that it's just not like universally, literally in every single case that anybody's ever been pregnant, it's done this. But if we say, pregnancy increases the risk factors of, like, maybe we make it sound more determinate than we know it to be. And those are the types of rhetorical choices that we have to make in scientific writing. In the beginning, I presented scientific writing as like, in a way, it's easier than nuanced writing, and it's easier than creative writing because you don't have to be all like fluffy and like metaphorical. But you have to be like so precise and accurate. And that literally comes down to the purpose of every single word in the sentence. And that can be tough.
Could you also do the last sentence like in an introduction if you're trying to give background on like, let's say our studies on something associated with pregnancy or whatever. And you could use, so like our introduction sections more often passive voice.
Yeah, they can be.
Showing past things that were, which I guess is a past tense thing.
No, but it's, when we talk about this as establishing relationships are context and their background and their contextual information. And that's what introductions do, is they place our topic that we're going to talk about within a wider context of like how it got to be this way. And that can be passive. Over the years, pregnancy risks have decreased due to blah, blah, because what we're doing is we're relating the concepts to each other and getting ourselves to the present state of what we're going to talk about. Okay, so when talking about reader expectation and when we talk about sentence structure, one thing to generally remember is that in Western writing in America, the way that we're used to reading is we start what we know And then the end of the sentence is the new information. And then the beginning of the next sentence is now, that new information is now known information. And then the end of the sentence is new information, right? So passive voice sometimes plays into that. We're more comfortable reading what we know. Okay, pregnancy has been found to have this medical effect that I don't know about yet, right? So we can put things in context better if we start with what we know. We're going to talk a little bit more about stress positions. We're going to talk about topic positions and stress positions in sentences. Just know that generally the beginning of the sentence is always the topic. We talk about it as being the subject, but if we just like split a sentence in half into like subject and predicate, what that means is the beginning is the topic, and the end is the new stuff, right? I want to keep going. Okay, so what to do with this? What to do with this is, generally speaking, make sentences active because that's what your faculty wants. It demonstrates knowledge of cause and effect. It demonstrates knowledge of correlation between information, and it just simply is easier to read. The whole point of writing is that you have a reader on the other end and you want them to understand it without a lot of effort. It's not the reader's job. So we talk about critical reading, right? As students, we critically read, we engage with the text. That's great. But ultimately, it's not the reader's job to engage so deeply and just have things left up to interpretation that they have to do the work on their own. We do the work for them. So we're going to consciously craft our sentences. Again, we're going to write in any way that we want. But when we have our sentences written, we're going to go back and we're going to look at what our tendencies tend to be. We're going to look at which sentences really do need to be passive, and that's fine, because we've strategically made them that way. And what we'll try to do is make the majority of our sentences active. Oh, and does this mean that we can be passive aggressive? We're going to be aggressive about when we're passive. Yes. Can you tell that I did this late at night? Okay. The good news is we're at like the halfway point of the information. I also think that the second half of this, because we get into tips and stuff, it's not as heavy as this part was. Do we want a break? We've been going for an hour. We have another hour. It's totally up to you guys. I'm not going to call anybody out if they need to go to the bathroom. It's just whether or not you want to keep going. Do our brains need a sec, or are we in?
I've been powering through. Let's do this.
Let's do it. So here's what we've done. General communication guidelines and reader expectations, and the fact that various documents follow various conventions. And we're going to know the specifics of those when we're writing them. But today we're just going to talk about principles that generally apply to scientific writing. We've talked a little bit about being strategic in making the action and the agent clear through deciding whether we're doing passive or active voice. And then we didn't take a break. And so what we're going to do now is talk about concision, Allison. So now we're going to talk about making things shorter. And we're going to talk about revision strategies that have to do with all of these topics that we've been talking about. I'm going to finish up with a few tips, like I said, and you guys just interrupt me with more questions. So here's what we're looking to do, to Allison's point about making things shorter, is we're going to look to see if we have redundancies and how we can eliminate them. So what we mean by that is redundancies are when we've said an important point more than once. So we don't need to take away the important point, we need to take away the repetition. But when we talk about eliminating writing zeros, that means sentences and phrases and clauses that we have in our sentences that add nothing and have to go. And we're going to talk about reducing sentences to their simplest forms, which we've done already just in playing a little bit with prioritizing information, with getting subjects and verbs closer together, and with making things active. We've already started on that, but we'll do some more strategies. So this is just a good summation, I think. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should have no unnecessary words. A paragraph, no unnecessary sentences. For the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires not that the writer make every sentence short or that he avoid detail and treat his subject only in outline, but that every word tell, every word says something. I want to say that this other quote I'm about to say is attributed to Mark Twain, but I'm not totally sure, but it might have been Thomas Jefferson. Somebody, one of our famous guys in history, said, I'm sorry this letter is so long. I would have worked to make it shorter, but I didn't have enough time. And I think we can all relate to that, right? Like there are times when sitting down and writing a 10-page paper sounds so much easier than writing the dang abstract for the 10-page paper, okay? Can I get an amen? That's just the truth. It's just the truth. So this next section is to keep in mind concision and elimination of anything that's unnecessary. There's a phrase in rhetoric called tautology, which is the saying of the same thing twice in different words. We only want to say it once. So saying the important thing is important, but we only want to say it once. So again, write however you write. We all write redundantly, especially at this level. I'll tell you the 2 times I see redundancy is that I teach like beginning level composition at CU Denver. And when people have no idea what they're writing about, they're totally redundant. And when people are way overeducated, they're totally redundant. The pendulum swings. Everybody else in the middle is just kind of half-assing it. But on those 2 ends, there's a lot of information, okay? So again, I am not telling anybody to change the way that you write. We're talking about improving the way that you edit. In scientific and business writing, wordiness is a problem because it causes friction. It causes the reader to slow down and just kind of regroup and figure out what's actually going on. And you want your sentences to be seamless and to flow. Okay. Don't worry about, writing any of this down or taking any pictures. Any charts that I have in here are from your handouts. Most of the charts that I show like this are going to be from the clarity and concision one, which is like the second or third one in your pile. But I just want us to see this. The words that are in parentheses are the ones that we can eliminate. So we often see like, already existing. Well, that's tautology, right? Just existing. Or alternative choices, just choices. At the present time, nope, at present. Especially for those of you who are like, I've got to cut down 400 more words to get to the word count. This is where you live. Right here, cut words. Basic fundamentals. Well, fundamentals are basic. Just fundamentals, right? Completely eliminate. Okay, that's what eliminate means. I used to work for a woman in another life. And I was much younger, and it was terrible because I would always modify the word unique. So I was all like, oh, that song lyric is so totally unique. And she would ream me out. She was like, that's what unique means. It doesn't need a modifier, right? Eliminate's kind of the same way. Like, that's what it means. Currently being. Nope, just currently. What else? Oh. Now at this time currently in the present day, right? So Allison, here's where you're like shortening it up. So we're getting what I'm saying. But these are colloquialisms, and so this is how we think, it's how we talk, and it's how we're going to write. So this is where we can start to look to cut stuff down. A lot of our cutting doesn't come from main points that we're making or any of the scientific jargon. It comes from like all the other filler words in the sentence. So do we see how this is repetitive? PHQ-9 data collection for the study occurred in 15 InquireNet organizations representing over 200 clinicians over a period of approximately 3 to 4 months. These organizations collected many PHQ-9s during this short period of time. I don't think we even need the second sentence at all, right? The first sentence provides detail, it provides scope, it gives us a really good idea. Not saying that it's perfect, but it presents a lot of information in an easily digestible way, and then the second sentence comes along and just repeats stuff in, a condensed version for the reader, but we don't even need it. So those are examples of saying things more than once, using 18 words that mean the same thing when we should only be using one. And we have those in our handouts. But again, I want to point out that those are things that we really do want to say. We just don't need to say them 15 times. Okay? Here are things that we don't even need to say. It is interesting to note that. Nope. If it's interesting to note that, that's why you've written it down. You don't even need that part of your sentence. If it's not interesting, it shouldn't be in the paper, right? I have one of my bosses calls when students say, or writers, when writers say, it is obvious that, he says that's a big FU to the reader, because if it's obvious, why are you telling us that, right? So let's think about those things we don't even need to say. So we're going to get to some phrases that offer no meaning or no enhancement or no interpretation of the information. So I just said, it's interesting to note that measures of depression, We could just say, measures of depression symptoms and severity, medication adherence, and medication-related side effects are poorly documented in the EHR. Don't even need the first clause. In fact, if we're evaluating how we write, maybe one of our bad habits is that we always start with those clauses. It's interesting that we noticed that in the past this has, nowadays.
Nevertheless.
Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes we got to provide a transition, right? Sometimes we need something there, but not in every sentence. I have students who struggle with introductions. And we all struggle with introductions. I'm not blaming them for this, but they love invoking world history. So a lot of times I read since the history of time, people have had to eat. Did I not know that? Did any of us not know? We wouldn't be here if people didn't have to eat. What they're trying to do is start, right? So pay particular attention to that if you do it in the beginning or in conclusion. Of just since the beginning of time, in the history of mankind, we've had lower back pain. People with backs have lower back pain. That's not telling us anything, okay? Here are zeros. So here are things that we don't actually need at all. It's significant that. It's noteworthy that. It should be pointed out that. Whatever comes after the that is where you start the sentence. It is significant that this workshop is for AMC students. This workshop is for AMC students. The fact that, guys, we see this one a lot. I don't know if you guys do this a lot, but whatever comes after the fact that, that's where the sentence needs to start.
It's funny because I read so many journal articles that have all of that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Well, and meanwhile, then we get feedback when we submit to journals that tell us not to do it, and you just, what is happening, right? And again, it's not that if we do these things, it is indicative of poor thinking, or it is indicative of bad writing. It's just indicative of areas that could be improved for concision. We shouldn't be wasting words when we don't have to. So can somebody, just like we did before, can somebody pick one of these and eliminate the unnecessary part?
the second one, you can just remove significant,
Okay?
just a limitation of the proposed project.
Yep. Now, I'm anticipating my devil's advocate in the back row. But what if it is significant? Poor Allison is never going to come to a workshop again. But let me point out, it's not a terrible sentence. Sometimes things are significant. Sometimes when we write papers for class, we need to demonstrate as a knowledge check that we recognize that it's significant. Nothing wrong with that sentence. If we said, let me make it worse. So if we said something like, as was discovered in the article, importantly, a significant limitation that should be noted. Okay, take out all of those and let's just end up with a significant limitation. Okay, so that's an example of like over the top. In the first one, other potential limitations of the proposed project will be directly related to the fact that eligible patients will all be taking an antidepressant to treat depression. Well, don't we know that that's what an antidepressant is? So I'm seeing several things here. So other limitations, or if we feel very strongly about potential, we can leave that in there. Other potential limitations of the project. Will be related to, okay, maybe we need the fact that.
Eligible patients taking.
Yeah, okay, there we go, added gerund. Will be related to eligible patients taking antidepressants. I think we all know why we take antidepressants. We might need some right now for this presentation. But you know what I mean? There are like 50 extra words in that first sentence. And we could make it shorter. You know what I'm saying? Because now some of those words aren't doing anything. Are you with me? Anybody want to fight me on that? Are we good?
And this can be really important in the publishing context because often your chances of getting a paper published as a brief are better than getting it published as a long paper. And so you need to be able to write your 2,500 word long paper in 1,500 words. And really, you can.
You can. It's so terrible. I'm finishing up a thesis right now, and it's just so awful making it shorter, but you can. That is a strength that scholars have. And it is a discipline that we learn and should be able to demonstrate. We learn all kinds of skills. We learn all kinds of knowledge. If we can't communicate that articulately, we do ourselves a disservice. So look at it as an investment in yourself, even though it's a painful one. It's like the worst kind of exercise ever because it's mental. In finishing my thesis, I think I've eaten 2 boxes of donuts in 2 days. And that's a direct result of this. Okay?
And you can't do for your class papers, but if you're writing for publication, sometimes it's easier to give it to somebody
Yep.
else. I'm usually the person in my team who I say, I can take 200 words out of that. And I take 300 out of that. But I can't do it necessarily for my own work.
Yeah. That is true. And we should remember that when it's our own work, give it to somebody else. And just let them redline it. And they're doing you a favor, really. So substitute damn every time you're inclined to write very. Your editor will delete it, and then the writing will be just as it should be. So very is like what I used to do with my boss, and I was like, oh, that is so totally very unique, and she would just almost fire me, right? We don't need the modifiers that we think we need. If we use adjectives or adverbs, let's use them strategically. Okay, so back to like us attacking the it is, there was, there were. My boss calls these expletives of writing. These are like the cuss words of writing. But I want to point out that it's not always wrong. Sometimes things are in a state of being, and we use the word is. And we use the word are. But let's just watch out for that. Because when we set up every sentence with it is, it was, there were, there are, there remain to be, we're setting ourselves up structurally for extra words that don't matter. So we're actually setting ourselves up for those zero phrases. Flying through the rest of concision. Let's only use words that are absolutely necessary, and in doing that, let's reduce sentences to their simplest forms. Like I said before, simple doesn't mean simplistic. It doesn't mean elementary or basic. We write very sophisticated sentences, but we can do that clearly. And clearly often means shorter. And that doesn't mean that you have staccato sentences. Just, I went here, it was good. I ate this. I saw this movie, it was fun. You know, this isn't like a children's book. But it does mean that for those of you who like to provide context and you like, for the self-disclosed rambler in the back, this does mean that maybe one of your revision techniques could be to just look for where the periods are. Another thing that you could do if that's not working for you. But I just want to repeat, you don't even have to read your work to find the dots on the page. And if there are only like 3, your sentences are too long. If you've generally gone over 4 lines and you haven't hit a period yet, it's too long. After a certain point, it doesn't matter that you understand the sentence because you're the writer, not the reader. You have to play to the audience. Another thing that you can do, you know, if we had all the time in the world, or maybe bribe a friend to do this, if you read the sentence out loud and you have to take a breath or swallow or take a drink of beer before you get to the period, it's too long. It's too long, right? So those are just kind of some rules of thumb. Here,
you're getting to this, but also the use of $5 words when 10 cents.
Oh, totally. Like the academies, you know, just like use the words that we understand.
And not utilize them.
Oh my God.
That's one of my techniques.
Yeah.
Huh?
I like the word utilize.
But it sounds like puffery.
I think it's all
I think it's so nice. That's probably,
Utilize,
that was the nerdiest sentence I think that's been uttered in here today. It's like, I just really appreciate utilize as a word. This is also on one of your worksheets. But this is another example of how to trim things down. I know that at this point in the workshop, things are kind of running together. They're even kind of running together for me. But some of these strategies might resonate with us in different ways. But take a look at how the words on the right, when you trim them, don't change the meaning. So I'll give it to you guys that when I said, you know, a significant result is, and some of us, like our hackles rose up because we don't want to take that word significant out. Okay. But look at the words that we can take out here. Has the potential to is way more complicated than can, or most likely will, right? Or owing to the fact that, that's even worse than the fact that. Now we're owing to the fact that, or now it's due to the fact. It's like, what is this, like King James language? Like Old English, you know what I mean? The question as to whether, no, whether or not this is an issue remains to be found. There is no doubt but that, okay, no doubt, undoubtedly. Okay, here are places where the trimming adds the momentum. The taking out the extra stuff that slows the reader down adds the momentum to the sentence. Whether it's active or passive, it doesn't matter. It gives the sentence a better flow. Therefore, the proposed intervention has the potential to be much more widely utilized. Oh, there you go, Carol. Much more widely utilized in diverse clinical settings. Okay, that was 55 words in the middle. Does it change the meaning if we say, therefore, the proposed intervention can be widely used in diverse clinical settings? Does that change anything significant? No. Does it? Is anybody going to argue with me? It just makes it clear. Allison's looking like she's going to argue. Are you with me? I'm going to stop picking on Allison because she'll never come to one of these again.
I'm kind of in the same lines as Elisa. Like writing scientifically and also eloquently, but maybe you can't write eloquently, scientifically. Does that make sense? Like creatively, like making it flow and sound nice, and not so much puffery, and not making it so like static.
Sure.
And so like I think that top sentence is great. Yeah.
So I would pick on the top sentence because I would say much more widely is too many words.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on the, if we really want to put our English hats on, we could say, therefore, the proposed intervention has the potential to be widely used, but we don't need much more widely. That's like so very totally unique. We don't need all that. And it can still be a strong sentence. And scientific writing, so I'm using these words like simple and concise and straightforward. Your thoughts themselves are very sophisticated, and I've seen your work. The way that you make connections and the way that you synthesize information is the sophisticated part of your writing. You are by no means simply paraphrasing or directly quoting or parroting what other people have said. You always have a voice. There's always some kind of argument that you're making in the paper about whether or not this should be done, how it should be done, when it should be done, that is driven by your voice and how you actively are answering the prompt. It's like you're the driver and these are in the back seat. And so much of that is what comes through in your writing. There are other choices you make as an author that demonstrate complexity and that demonstrate more nuance than you think. And that is how you're structuring your paper. It's how you're organizing your points. It's how you're establishing how those connect to each other. And that is all done sort of in the stuff we talked about at the last workshop about just how the building blocks of the paper go together. You decide all of that. It's just also your responsibility to make sure that the reader understands it at the same level that you do. And not everybody thinks in those Shakespearean sonnets, right? Not everybody does that. Not everybody speaks English. Really, like in our field, there are things that we need to be very aware of about our audience and be as strategic as we can.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, just having the voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't click in my brain.
Yeah. That's also getting lost because we're so down in the weeds here. I've warned you guys so you wouldn't run out screaming that this is very grammar oriented. It's very sentence oriented. But when we step back and we take the 20,000 foot view, you're pulling all the strings of the paper.
Well, just to add to it, the other thing is to go back to what the earlier points about remembering who your audience is. If you're writing up the same study for an audience of public health practitioners, you might write it one way, but if you're writing it up for an epidemiologic journal, you would use somewhat different language, somewhat different emphasis, and tell somewhat of a different story, but it's still the same science.
Right.
And so it has to have a story that's meaningful to the audience, which gets back to the comment earlier about deciding what journal to send it to. We can come back to that particular time, but it all has to fit together.
We have knowledge of, okay, we know. We are aware of, we know. There are indications that, okay, this indicates, right? These things can be compared to, these results resemble, these are just ways to make things more concise. You guys have these in your sheet too. Let's talk, yeah.
If we're looking for, we're editing our document and we're looking for these wordy phrases, should we just type in word search?
Do it.
And then look to see every instance we're using R?
The other thing you can do too, again, if we lived in a perfect world and had all the time in the world, is that you could make somebody else do this. It's always so effective to make somebody else do it because you lose control of it. You don't have control. Is to have them read a paragraph or two out loud. Again, our brains skip over stuff. Our brains get our own logic. But if somebody else is reading something and so in my class yesterday, we were reading a sample essay and somebody was writing about propaganda. And in the introduction, which was mostly well done, the word propaganda was in every sentence. So at a certain point, everybody starts laughing when we say the word propaganda. That's another way that you can kind of hear it of like, oh my God, I'm using, implications in literally every sentence in here. I need to, right? So you could do a word search for it, especially if you guys are working on stuff and you know that there are keywords. So let's think in terms of publication. Let's think in terms of journal articles. So if you know your keywords are going to be Becca Wright, Writing Center, AMC, scientific writing, do word searches on those and just watch them pop up everywhere. And see if you need to remove some of them. Same thing with your phrases. Like if you're worried about passive voice, then look up were, was, start to look at those things and see what pops up.
I really like the reading out loud idea. Whenever I proofread, and particularly if I'm proofreading galley proofs for a journal article, I read it out loud because that's the only way I catch an extra word or an extra word that wasn't supposed to be there at all versus or extra words that don't need to be there but that I wrote.
But that ended up in there anyway. The other thing is, again, if you're reading out loud and your face is blue and you're totally out of air and you haven't gotten to a period, that you realize that way more than your brain just skimming it quietly. It really helps.
I've also turned on in Microsoft Word, under spelling and grammar, there's a passive voice.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, and sometimes it flags if you have it, but it misses some. But I've turned it on, and then someone will send me their paper, and I'm like, whoa, I mean, it's really mind blowing when you see someone else's work, and that kind of gets flagged as like the little squiggly line under it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's excellent.
That's a good one. So I'm going to move a little bit more quickly through these because we get them. I just want these to be a reminder. Let's be careful too if we're talking about 0 words, if we're talking about not having so much redundancy. What services are adjectives and adverbs adding to our writing? Another thing is in scientific writing in particular, adjectives and adverbs start to get squishy. What does very mean in a scientific way? What does mostly, largely, generally, like what do some of these words mean scientifically? So let's pay attention to that. So like comprehensive, detailed, specific, fundamental, particular, somewhat, what does that mean? Kind of, sort of, shouldn't even be in there. There's nothing wrong with comprehensive, right? There's nothing wrong with detailed. But when we start to arrive at these conclusions and kind of make these informed judgments, can somebody else does your reader define those things the way you do? So when you're writing that a study was mostly successful, what does mostly mean, right? Like if your doctor's like, this shot's mostly going to help you out. Like, hang on a second, So the objective of our work, or in trying to take our out, the objective of the work is to obtain data that can be used in conjunction with a comprehensive chemical kinetics modeling study, okay, to generate a detailed understanding of the fundamental chemical processes that lead to engine knock. I'm not really sure as a reader that I have a firm grasp of what that means. More importantly, I could be forming an idea in my mind that the author didn't have in their mind at all, and it's their fault because I'm an educated reader. So they didn't do their job in terms of specificity. Adverbs describe verbs. So very, really, basically, generally, right? We're getting really squishy with some of these. Given our current working relationship, we will be very efficient. Okay, here's our proposal, right? Here's our we will be very efficient in securing funding and conducting and disseminating research. What does very mean? Like, Vary by my standards as somebody providing the money means something super specific compared to somebody who's going to spend my money. Oh, he's a very productive and pleasant collaborator. What does that mean? Here are some needs. Okay, so the academies, right? The using complicated words. A lot of times in our field, complicated words are really like the jargon, all the acronyms, right? All the big words. Sometimes we have to use those, right? The more advanced we get in our field, the more we use those just colloquially, because that's how we understand. There you go, Carol. Utilize.
And you got it twice.
Oh, utilization. So the utilization is the nominalization. That's taking the verb and making a noun out of it, right? But like the stuff that's complex, individualized, it's just individual. Amongst, we're not British, okay? Among. We don't spell color with a U, okay? These are just ideas. Again, we're not picking on the complicated words, but we're saying if our paper is full of them, it inhibits clarity. Oh, but know your audience. If you're writing to a British audience, do it. Amongst. So the nominalizations, let's just be aware that this is a thing. If you work in groups, you'll definitely notice your peers and your coworkers doing this. You may do this in your own writing. It's not universally bad, but generally it's going to set you up for poor sentence structure. Because generally if you're nominalizing, then you're going to have extra words and you're going to have passive tense, generally speaking. They often cause unnecessary adjectives because they often have to be modified once you turn a verb into a noun. You've got to describe it. And it kind of hides the action. So if you're going to use a nominalization because something was done, let me try to think, like the utilization of the tools was effective. Just utilizing these specific tools led to the desired results, right? Here are some of them: establishment, measurement, development, discovery, investigation. This study will conduct a thorough investigation of the results that come from. The study investigates the most prominent results from this thing. Active. This example provides an illustration of the problems with nominalizations because we're getting meta now. I could just say this example illustrates. Active. There's our favorite. If there could be the presentation of data that would indicate the representation of the status of the problem was accurate, then a decision could be made? No. If somebody presents data indicating that somebody accurately represented the status of the problem, we can decide. This can be decided. Did I hear somebody? We're getting there. So here are some editing tips. Okay, I want to focus just a little bit, just generally. There are lots of words on this slide, but when we talk about sentence structure, and I talked about known, new, and I said generally there's like an agent and an action. So we learn mostly in Western education, we learn through metaphor and story. That's how we start to make connections. Like from a very early age, we're told stories, things are presented in narratives because we follow characters through their actions to a result. So a lot of times our sentences operate as a mini story, and so we should be very clear about who or what we're talking about and what they're doing. So generally speaking, our readers have 5 questions when they read our writing. What's going on? From whose perspective? How does this link back to what you've told me? How does this prepare me for what's coming next? And where is the emphasis? In our language, we mostly place the emphasis on the end of the sentence. We start with what we know, we provide context, we get everybody on board in the story, and then we provide new information. That new information then becomes known information, and we start the next sentence with that, and then we lead on to new information. So the stress, so to speak, is always usually on the end of our sentences, not the beginning. So readers expect to be told something about the thing that comes first, which is why passive voice can be tricky if the action isn't what you're talking about, because you've started with it and now that's what the reader's thinking about. If the agent is what you're talking about, start with that and then they'll follow you throughout the action. We need like links and connections in our writing, which is why the longer our sentences are and the more clauses there are, we're trying to link between everything, and that's not possible. And so we get confused. We're looking for syntactic resolution. We're looking for all of the sentences to make sense, which is why I can use a really basic sentence like the boy threw the ball. And that's basic, but we're totally satisfied with that. Like, we have no questions about it. We totally understand. We can all picture that. If there are too many ideas in a sentence, there is no resolution that is satisfactory. So let's talk about those positions real quick before we wrap up. So the particular ideas in the beginning of the sentence define what the passage is going to be about for the reader, whether or not that's what you intend. So bees disperse pollen. That's what bees do. We're talking about bees. They look really super cute and fuzzy, and this is what they do, bees. Pollen is dispersed by bees. Pollen causes a lot of allergies this time of year and covers our cars and is yellow and grainy. Okay, pollen, not bees. So that's a really good example of what is the reader doing with what you've started with in the topic position. Okay, we're dying with the examples now. One other thing. In scientific writing, your topic, your subject, is oftentimes not just one thing. So when I say the boy threw the ball, your topic is an idea, right? Your topic can even be a cause and effect as the topic of something else. So again, in not trying to make our sentences overly simplistic, we should remember that the topic or the agent could be an extended idea. It doesn't have to be just like one word. So we're not trying to Allison's point, we're not trying to like distill information so much that it sounds like a robot wrote it. We're not trying to do that. Sometimes your topics or your agents or the actions are complicated things, and that's okay. We should just be strategic about where we're putting them in the sentence and what they're doing in the sentence. Which is why when we talk about, when in the beginning I started with the overly long, complicated sentences and then split them up into separate sentences, I don't want us to come away thinking that everything has to be its own separate sentence. We can live in the academic world of semicolons, which have a complete sentence on both sides, but those sentences are directly related. The semicolon indicates to the reader, you're about to read something else. It follows this idea exactly. The other thing, we use colons when one side or the other is not a complete sentence. Again, a colon is going to indicate to the reader, this colon is like a signpost to them that's going to indicate that these two things are related, but one side or the other isn't going to be a complete sentence. It could be like a list. It can be one or two words. So that's the difference between those two. So the problem with starting out with known information and ending up with new information is that the new information is stressed. And when the second half of our sentence has 55 things in it, we don't know which one to stress. And so you know how when everything's important, nothing's important, or when everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency? It's the same thing with that. If we have 25 ideas in the same sentence, they're just not going to be treated as equally important. So we have to use that stress position at the end to focus on what the stress should be. So what we want to do generally, we're almost done, is just remember to place the old or the known information, the common information in the beginning, and work toward your bigger point, or work toward the connection or the logical sequence that you're going to make. Then you want to think how that is directly going to relate to the next sentence. In thinking that every single sentence has a point, this also helps us eliminate redundancies, because if we're leaning forward toward the next sentence and it's the very same thing that we just said, we've just fallen over, right? We need the support of like the next sentence being new. Okay. So this is generally a recap. Let's get into tips. Tips are write however you want to write, revise more than once. Revise strategically. There are many different ways to revise. If you're working on a paper for class, do a separate run through of your paper for every single one of the prompt requirements. So for example, if your prompt requirements is that you use APA format, just go through and make sure everything's in APA format. Does the citation look right? Did you cite in the places where you paraphrased? Is your reference page correct? Did you use the correct number of citations that you were supposed to, right? Just check for that, just sanity check. If the prompt indicates a compare and contrast between two methodologies, did you do that, or did you just summarize methodology 1 and methodology 2? Make sure that the compare and contrast happened, right? So one way to do this just as a student is to use the prompt as a checklist once you're done. Ways to start to revise for scientific writing is to identify the mistakes that you want to start to avoid, or the patterns that you know that you have, and read specifically for those things, or make somebody else read specifically for those things. So dedicate one whole read through just to cutting, just to making it shorter. What can I take out? The thing is, regardless of whether or not there's a word count, your writing is always going to be better if you can make it shorter. Doesn't mean too short. It doesn't mean at the expense of leaving out important information. It just means if you can be concise, man, your reader's really going to stick with you. We rarely ever make things longer when we revise. Do we ever? Has that ever happened in the history of any of our academic careers? Probably not. Use, just like we said, let's turn on her suggestion of like the Microsoft Word passive voice finder, and let's just use find and search and all of that for our wordiness, for the things that we're looking for. You can also print out your paper. Sometimes this is research shows, Carol, your favorite phrase. Research shows that when we print out a paper and we read it as a written product, we actually read it differently than we do on screens. I'm convinced that millennials don't actually read anything for this very reason. However, if we get in the, like if we go away from the computer screen and we circle and we underline things, that shows us, that gives us like a map of our sentence structure as well. So we can find redundancies, our expletives, our adjectives and stuff that way. Here's some good, just general, I'm just going to bring it back out to some of the things that were our concerns to begin with. Mimic good writing. If your professors give you good examples of papers, or if you admire the things that they've written, mimic the style. We learn to write through reading. That's why avid readers are generally at least more comfortable writers. Because we internalize sentence structure and we internalize new ways of focusing on things that people who don't read don't have that exposure to. And this is not to say this is not to say plagiarize, right? This isn't to say use the exact things that they say or follow their structure of their argument exactly. It just means if you read something that you really admire, what do you admire about it? And start to implement those things in your own writing. There's nothing wrong with doing that. We do that in every other aspect of our life. We have organizational skills and we have bullet journals and we have all of these, CrossFit and whatever, because we're mimicking the things that we want to adopt, the practices we want to adopt. We can do that with writing too. Maybe try to step back. None of us have time for this, but maybe try to take 5 minutes and evaluate your own writing based upon what people have told you, like feedback from instructors or from committees and peer review journals and things like that. But also just from your own perspective, what are your strengths? What do you know that you're good at? If you're really good at those things, stop trying to improve those, right? Take a look at your weaknesses and work on one. And just through repetition, just through all the myriad of papers that we do have to write, you'll quickly start to progress, right? Notice too when you read things that are easy for you to read or things that are really hard for you to read. And remember that when you're writing for somebody else to read. Write how you write and then try to re-see things. This means, and I doubt this is the case for any of us in here, but if we're used to writing the night before something is due, God help us, there's not a lot of time for revision. If we can start to view writing as this process that's done more than once, like if we view it as a process that's just five steps, and writing is only one of those steps, then that gives us this leeway and this time to start to pay attention to this level of detail that we've talked about today. Revision literally means to re-see, to see again, to see anew. If we don't have the time to do that, our brains can't see it again. And expand your writing. Be open to what readers are saying. We get so persnickety about what people say about our writing because we spend so much dang time on it. And writing is a reflection of our thinking. And so when somebody critiques our writing, it feels very personal. It feels like they're critiquing all of our ideas. And the thing is, they're not. They're coming at our writing from an outside voice, and maybe some things are confusing, and maybe we should just pay attention to that. These include teacher comments, but not just. These can include peer reviews. And to her point about group work, intentional group work. So a lot of times we get stuck in groups and we just have to survive without killing anybody else. And we have to try to have a comprehensive tone. To answer your question, one of the main ways that you can do that is just have some poor soul be the editor, which is probably you, I'm guessing. But the reason for that is because I wonder if a consistent tone can even be done with multiple writers. Most of the people that I know who work in research teams and then get things published, it's always edited by one person on the team. Everybody has their job, everybody tries their hardest, but it just comes down to one predominant voice that belongs to one person to keep it cohesive. I don't know if you have other.
Yeah, I've worked with teams where some people like to say, you write the introduction, you write the methods, you write the results, you write the discussion. I can't do that. If it's my paper, I write the whole thing, but leave, Ashley, fill in some stuff here on how you develop the instrument, and then I'll edit it. And I think that accomplishes its own thing, but not everybody, and I know very successful people who write the other way. I just can't do it.
I apologize after leave, but is it possible to get a copy of your stuff?
Oh, sure. I'll send it to Carol and have her distribute it.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, I made a note to myself, I know a couple good papers on scientific writing that I will send along as well, from a colleague of mine who's a editor.
Can we get a link to the recording too?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I'll send that. It'll be posted within a week or so. Thanks for coming.
So that's all that I had. I marked out the stuff that we actually covered, and the poor guy, this was his question. This was also his question, but when he said, like, when are we ready to write? And the answer to that is, like, when we have ideas. We're not ready to write before we've done our research, and we're not ready to write when we don't understand the prompt. And we're not ready to write when we don't have ideas. But pretty much as soon as we have thoughts about it, even if they're incomplete, even if we're not even sure, even if they're mostly questions, we're ready to write. Because the writing is just getting it down and starting to get it organized.